The 12 tribes of Israel were once a united kingdom in the land of Israel and ruled by the great kings David and Solomon. So that's when Solomon's temple was built. And Solomon's temple was perhaps one of the greatest architectural feats ever completed, and definitely one of the most mysterious. Now, the 12 tribes of Israel are the descendants of Jacob, and eventually 10 of them were lost or removed from history. And for being such a controversial group, they're only mentioned in the Bible twice. 1 Kings 11:31, "Take for yourself 10 pieces, thus says the Lord your God of Israel. See, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and will give you 10 tribes." And there's not all that much history from that point on, and then the history ends with the destruction of the kingdom by the Assyrians in the year 722 BCE. And then the Assyrians exile the 10 tribes to the east, and from that moment the 10 tribes are lost from historical record. And I don't think it's accurate to say they're lost from historical record, but they were removed from historical record. So the 10 tribes of Israel, their names are Reuben, Simon, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Manasseh, and Ephraim. All of them but Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. We see the Jewish historian Josephus wrote that the 10 tribes are beyond the Euphrates till now, and are an immense multitude not to be estimated in numbers. So we can see when we look at a map of Tartary, and we're theorizing in this video that the lost 10 tribes of Israel are in fact the Tartarians. When it says that they're an immense multitude not to be estimated in numbers, an immense multitude of people would definitely line up with an immense multitude of land that they would inhabit. So there's at least the first connection, but this is Israel, so to the east would be Tartary. Let's look at some more historical text. The name Azareth, the name of the land beyond the great river, far away from the habitation of man, in which the 10 tribes of Israel will dwell, observing the laws of Moses, until the time of the restoration, according to 4 Esdras 13. Now, Columbus identified America as this land, and we will see why momentarily. Now, here we go again. Azareth, a region beyond the Euphrates River, which the Assyrians supposedly took the 10 tribes after the destruction of the northern kingdoms, and from which it was expected they would return in the last days. And they definitely are expected to return in the last days, as the prophet Isaiah promises their return in Isaiah 27:13. Let's take a look at the text of 2 Esdras 13. 2 Esdras is also called 4 Esdras, so they kind of have two names there, but here's chapter 13 and verse 45. Throughout that region there was a long way to go, a journey of about a year and a half, and that country is called Azareth, and they dwell there until the last times. Now, Azareth is not easy to locate on very many maps, but let's take a look at the maps we can find. Here we go, 1596 on this one, and here is Azareth, and of course this is in Tartary. This is a map of Tartary, and here's Azareth. Here are the 10 tribes, and I can't translate the rest. If you could translate, please put it in the comments below. And we can see 4 Esdras captured chapter 13. So it even mentions the chapter and verse where Azareth and the 10 tribes came. Now let's look up here where it talks about Naftali. Now again, that is one of the tribes of Israel, Naftali. Naftali, and I cannot translate this text, but here we get Danitas, so D-A-N, and again here D-A-N, Danimarki, which I believe corresponds to the tribe of Dan, just as we have the, it's talking also about the tribe of Naphtali, and it's possible it's talking about some of the other tribes, and I just can't translate it correctly. But we could see where they are at on the map. Here is the tribe of Dan, and here is the tribe of Naphtali, the Naftali Horde. and it's possible some of the others are listed here. It's interesting here we get Rubini, which may correspond with Reuben, the tribe of Reuben. But there's multiple tribes names written here, and as well as Azareth, and these are all within Tartaria. And I'm going to turn back to a map of the Holy Land, which this would be Israel, before the tribes were driven out. And we can see that more or less the tribe of Gad, tribe of Reuben, they were, of course, separated physically and geographically by their tribes. And the tribe of Benjamin. Right down here is Nazareth. And here's the tribe of Naftali. And here's Dan. So interesting that Naphtali and Dan are located right next to each other in the Holy Land, in Israel. And later, when they were kicked out of Israel and went to Azareth, it appears that Naphtali and Dan are once again neighbors with each other. Now, I'm not sure where this would be located at on our current map of Earth. The Bering Straits right here, and it extends almost to the North Pole, it looks like. So if we look at Google Earth, here's the Bering Strait, and this would be Tartaria, and it looks like it extends quite a bit north from there. And so I'm not sure. There's some islands up this way, and maybe kind of this landmass right here that look like it might be a higher elevation. So it's hard to say. Maybe even something going up, a land like this. But this is a good possibility in this area. And here the Bering Strait, and again reaching up towards the North Pole. So it's possible these areas are underwater now. Let's take a look at some other maps. Here we have Azareth, and again this is a Tartary map, and Azareth, and it's pretty much says the same information. The 10 tribes came here, and here are the 10 tribes. We've got Naphtali, the tribe of Dan, Naphtali and Dan up here. So again, the lost tribes of Israel being placed directly in Tartaria. And now we see this tent, which is something we also find over here on their original Holy Land map when they were in Israel. Here we've got this tent with the, this kind of almost circus style tent. I don't know what to call it other than that. That's how we see it here in the United States nowadays. And this little ball at the top, and you get this very similar looking tent, almost as if the same people were building these tents. Now this map is real interesting. It's a map of Christian influence, more or less, from 1600. And we can see up here Tinduk, many Christians, and some Christians. It's listing what kind of Christians or how many of them. And then as you get over here to Europe, you get Protestants, mostly Protestant. So kind of a map of religious influence around 1600. And up here in Asia, or Tartaria lists here, it says that many Christians, Tinduk, many Christians, almost as if this was kind of the root of Christianity, or the most influence of Christians was up here in Tinduk, it seems. Now it's interesting to look at this because in Asia, which is Tartary, in Asia are the Christians, and under the Patriarchy of Jerusalem. So we get the Christians under the Patriarchy of Jerusalem. Now again, we have a connection from Israel or Jerusalem right up into this area. This, of course, is where Azareth is located at, and we get the Christians underneath the Patriarchy of Jerusalem, Very interesting. We have a direct connection from Israel, or the tribes of Israel, to this area up here and the Christianity that's in this area. And going on to the next map, this one does not list Azareth specifically, but it does have Tenduk, and the kingdom where Christians reigned in the year 1290. And here's the Bering Strait. It's also interesting to note that the Great Wall of China was built between the bottoms of the mountains by the King of China against the incursions of the Tartars. And here we have Queen Se, and it seems to be historically correct that the Great Wall of China was built to keep the Tartarians out. Here is the Voyages and Adventures of Ferdinand Mendez Pinto, and we can see that this has a real in-depth description of the taking of the town of Queen Se by the Tartars. A Tartar commander enters with his army into the town of Queen Se, and they violently took over and completely wiped out and even burned cities straight to the ground. So the Tartar commander with his army entering into the town of Queen Se, and like we could see on the map right here, Queen Se and the Great Wall of China right there to protect this land against the incursions of the Tartars. And here we go again, the wall between China and Tartaria. I also want to bring up the mountain of Alchai, where the sepulchres of the kings of Tartaria. And it looks as though pyramids are built here. And that is exactly what the Egyptians did. What's inside of the pyramids? Well, the pyramids, like the pyramids that came before and after them, were royal tombs, the final resting place for their pharaohs or kings. So it's interesting that the Egyptians are doing that, and when we look on the maps and we see Mount Alchai, where the sepulchres are, or the tombs of the kings of Tartaria, we see pyramids. And let's take a real quick read from Marco Polo about the Tartarians. And he also seen Mount Alchai, of a city called Euphina, and many notable things of Tartaria. And here it talks about Prester John. So Prester John and the Tartars. But here we get the Tartars and many marvelous and strange things. So all the kings, the successors of the first kings, were buried in the mountain called Alchai, where they dwelled the great king. And when the great king died, they carried him and buried him there. And when they carried him or go with him, they kill as many as they meet in the way or in the street. And when they kill them, they say, "Go and serve the Lord in the other world." And they believe certainly that they go and do him service. And likewise, by this reason, when a great king dies, they kill all his camels, horses, and mules, believing that they serve the Lord in the other world. When the king of the Tartars died, there were slain 300,000 men that they encountered in the way by those that went with him to his burial to the said mountain. Now, 300,000 people getting killed sounds ridiculous, but remember, there's a historical count that there are such an immense multitude of people that they're not to be estimated in numbers, and they also have the most land out of everybody in the world. So not only maps, but also written accounts that the mountains of Alchai or Alkai, where the tombs are of the kings of Tartaria. And we see here on this map Mount Alkai, where the tombs are, and we get pyramid shapes. This one has Mount Alchai and without pyramids. Maybe the pyramids were destroyed. In fact, the pyramids must have been destroyed if there were pyramids. I don't know that there were. They certainly are not there now. But many of these maps show these essentially triangles coming out of the mountain that really look like pyramids, which we know are at least the tombs of the Egyptians. I want to go back for just a moment to this Tinduk area where many Christians, and it seems like there's a root of Christianity there. This map is showing, of course, Tartaria, and if we scroll in here to Tinduk, it's kind of hard to read, but we can see it's the kingdom in which Christians, and it says M. Paul Veneti at the year 1290. And we can see definitely it's talking about M. Paul Veneti in the year 1290. And all of these other maps, this one has Tinduk, but all the other ones also mentioned the year 1290. And many of them mention M. Paul Veneti. This one, I believe, just has 1290. This one says many Christians. This map has M. Paul Veneti on it, but it's up here, the island of M. Paul Veneti. It talks about it right here, that M. Paul Veneti. So definitely this guy played an important role, and it seems that it's associated with Christians in the year 1290, specifically, as we can see on this map, Christians and M. Paul Veneti in 1290. So M. Paul Veneti is talking about supposedly Paul of Venice. So he lived from 1369 to 1429, which does not line up with the year 1290, and I'm wondering what's the discrepancy there. But we could see here that this is definitely M. Paul Veneti, and we get the sphere Earth with the cross on top of it. There is the bird, as we see the double-headed Masonic bird, or the single-headed bird that's on the US dollar. And this looks like a real fancy bow, and not really looking like a Christian evangelist, but more of a conquering warrior. This map, in addition to talking about M. Paul Veneti here, it also talks about him right down here at Japan. It says that Japan Island, where M. Paul Veneti went to talk about Christ, is at least talking about M. Paul Veneti and Christ. So while this guy is basically, I've never even heard of him myself, and Wikipedia really doesn't say much about him. Really, certainly doesn't talk about Japan or any Christian movement in Upper Asia, Tartaria, none of that. And in fact, it has his complete year wrong according to these maps. So I'm not sure, but another mystery to unlock on this guy, and why he's so prevalent in some of these old maps and talked about so much. We can at least say that there is a definitive link between Jerusalem, Christianity in the Tinduk area, and the fact that somehow this Christianity under the Patriarch of Jerusalem has made its way here see Jerusalem straight up into Tartaria. Now, going back to the land of Azareth, I just want to draw two similarities here. The first one is Nazareth, and Nazareth is the childhood home of Jesus. But of course, if you take the N off, you're left with Azareth, which is where the 10 tribes of Israel went. So there's just an interesting observation. One, and the second one is Azeroth, and this is the world in the World of Warcraft, and there are humans here. So it's Azeroth, which is obviously a purposeful misspelling of Azareth. So it's safe to say that the humans of Azeroth may be perhaps a lost tribe of Israel. And here we have Urbano Monet's map, which is a flat Earth map, or a polar azimuthal equidistant map. And not only does it have, these mysterious lands at the North Pole, it of course has Azareth. And it even talks about the 10 tribes of Israel. And we can see here that it's in Tartaria. And this is the Tartar Sea. And over here the Bering Strait. And like all the other maps, we have Azareth, where the 10 tribes of Israel went, located directly across the Bering Strait. Now, is it possible that the Tartarian people, or the 10 tribes of Israel, instead of only moving up this way, like Naftali and Dan did, but in fact, they went across the Bering Strait over here in the United States? Well, on this map, we can see that there are camps here and there are Tartars. So they definitely made it up into Canada. Here is Quiveria, in which he has drawn and also described buffaloes. And I believe that Quiveria is Omaha, Nebraska. This is a picture of Omaha, Nebraska before it was completely all destroyed and smashed to the ground by the Freemasons during the World Fair. And I believe this was architecture and statues, which were of course built by the Tartarians. This was a Tartarian city, and the Tartarian city of Quiveria. This was 1898 in Omaha. Clearly not architecture built by the American settlers. One more picture of Omaha, Nebraska, and you can see some of the great architecture that used to be there, and some of the statues. Absolutely breathtaking. And here's the Daily Nebraska State Journal from 1889, and Tartarax. Rex in Latin means king, R-E-X. So Tartarex would mean the Tartar king. And you can see that the monarch returns to his old realm of Quiveria. He reigns for a day. So here is yet another connection between Nebraska, Omaha, Nebraska, and Quiveria, and it says that basically the Tartar king is going to return to his own old realm of Quiveria. And that is why I say I believe that Quiveria is, for one, it's a region, but the city of Quiveria, I believe, is on Omaha, Nebraska, and its location right here by the river would also be correct for Omaha. Any more evidence of the Tartarians in North America? America, 1492, Christopher Columbus. What do we have here? Here there are people in camps, societies beginning in tents, and they're Tartarians. You're telling me when Christopher Columbus got to America, there was also Tartarians here? Let's take a look at this map. Christopher Columbus. And it even has him drawn. He's got the red collar, the black hat. You can see Christopher Columbus. But right over here at the Bering Strait, and the text is going across the Bering Strait as if from this area, as if the text is talking about both the Tinduck area and across the Bering Strait up by Alaska. It basically says the same thing here. There's people starting in tents or camps, and society is starting, and they're Tartarians. So this even has the same exact color, as if they're owned by the same people, and it's clear that the Tartarians did cross from the Tinduck area over the Bering Strait into America. And we can see that depicted also in a painting right here. We have Christopher Columbus. I know this is Christopher Columbus because we are at South America or Central America where he landed. He has the red coat and the black hat, just like he does up here. There he is, Christopher Columbus. So Christopher Columbus has gotten off of the boat over here at America, and who did he encounter? Well, some Native Americans back here sitting in a hammock. But who is this guy? Because he has the same skin color as Christopher Columbus, and he looks like a warrior from ancient Greece or something like that. If I didn't know any better, I would think that that guy belonged to a city like this. And of course, this is Chicago, before it was completely destroyed to the ground by the Freemasons, which I've covered thoroughly in a separate video. But we can see that this guy that Christopher Columbus encountered came from a city like this. Not only the type of clothes he's wearing, you know, again, it looks like some kind of ancient Greek warrior who would come out of a city like this one. And certainly not a Native American with this metal shield and mace. I'll also point out that it appears the red, white, and blue comes from the Native Americans, as we see here, America, with the Indian lady and the red, white, and blue colors. And a quick side note that the bride chase is a marriage custom that came from the Tartars. And I've read about that in another book. I forget which one. But here we see it depicted on a map. So there's all kinds of evidence that the Tartarians definitely crossed the Bering Strait into the United States and Canada, and that they were establishing cities and kingdoms in North America. In fact, if you look at the map from Urbano Monet and you go to Azareth, where they would have began their society, you find cities, and cities by these red buildings, you know, these red triple building. We could see what a city is. And this is an established city that's been there a long time. This was their route where they started from. And as they expand to the east, they start to get into tents and chariots, because they're moving eastward and they're conquering this entire area. And they have tents over here, but as you get back towards Azareth, you'll notice that it's not tents but established cities. They have these cities built. And if you cross the Bering Strait, you'll find the same thing. We find established cities. The city of Quiveria, all the way down to the city of San Francisco is right here on the map. San Francisco, located right next to volcanoes. And there's all these cities that have been established. But as you move further from Azareth to the west, you'll notice that the cities disappear and they become Tartarian tents. So looking at a view of this map, we can see that the Azareth area, they have all established cities in this area, taking over a huge part of the globe. And anywhere that they don't have cities established, they're starting to build these tents. And it's starting to begin society, start with the tents, it looks like, and then build up society from there. And that's why, as they expanded to the east over here to the west, and down south, that we read about in the books, the raiding of the city of Queen State and the Great Wall of China going up to protect against the excursions of the Tartars. So obviously they were also going this way to the east, this way to the west, and south, conquering essentially as much land as they could. And it's no surprise that we find out that the 10 tribes of Israel are an immense multitude, not to be estimated in numbers. This is basically a census for the world, and it's from 1744. And it lists how much land each country owns. And here we get Tartar, and they have more land than anybody else in the world. Tartary Muscovite, 3 million square miles, whereas Russia is here with 1 million square miles. So now the Tartary and Russia are really in the same area, but you can see that Tartary owns more land than anybody else in the entire world. They are the world power, slaying 300,000 people when a king dies. And they also have more land than anybody else. That lines up with what we know of the lost 10 tribes, that they're an immense multitude not to be estimated in numbers. We know that the Tartarian people are extremely good at architecture, probably the best architects in the world. And Freemasons trace their roots back to the stonemasons who built King Solomon's temple. Not only that, but King Solomon used the Star of David, and the star was said to have magical properties, and its inscription on the signet of Solomon was said to give him access to the genius that helped him build the temple. The temple has specific significance to the Masons because they trace their history back to the stonemasons who worked on it. So the stonemasons, the Freemasons, believe that their roots are Jews, or the tribes of Israel, who built King Solomon's temple. Specifically, the ones mentioned in 1 Kings 5:15, Solomon had 70,000 carriers and 80,000 stonecutters in the hills. The Masons believe that their heritage comes from these stonecutters, and they, of course, are Jews, as they are the tribes of Israel. And so Freemasonry does have its roots in the building of King Solomon and the actual stonecutters who were in Israel. That is why the Freemasons are obsessed with King Solomon, and that's why all the Masonic lodges are built after King Solomon's. The checkered floor even is supposedly has a connection to King Solomon's temple. But the connection between the tribes of Israel and the Tartarians is the ability to build magnificent architecture. Here, of course, King Solomon's temple is no doubt a magnificent work. And when we look at North America and all of the magnificent architecture that was destroyed, for example, here in San Francisco, this does not align with architecture that could have been built by the early American settlers. It is, in fact, architecture that was already here, and it was built by the Tartarians. Of course, the Tartarians had made their way into North America and were building cities here. They had cities. We could see the difference between the Tartarian architecture of San Francisco and what the American settlers were able to build with their skills, but certainly not the grand architecture that they inherited when they came to America. So the link of the ability to build grand architecture and perhaps a special genius to build such exquisite architecture and phenomenal fountains such as this one, which is carved completely out of stone. It has a hollow stone sphere that rotates in this fountain and also lights up. It had a light on the inside of it. And we know from these photos from the early 1900s that these fountains have significant wear and tear on them. They're falling apart, and they certainly are much, much older than 1850, which is the year San Francisco was founded. No, this is absolutely Tartarian architecture, a Tartarian-built fountain, which was destroyed by Freemasons during the Great World Fairs. So there's certainly a link between the tribes of Israel having an ability to put together this amazing architecture, and also the Tartarian people having the ability to build grand architecture that we cannot replicate today. Now it's pretty clear why the Freemasons had to destroy this beautiful architecture and just completely tear it all to the ground and leave nothing left but ruins. Because they had to make sure that the 10 tribes of Israel remain lost from history. And again, it's no accident that the 10 tribes are lost from historical record. They have been intentionally removed from historical record. And that is what we see here. The intentional removing of the Tartarians from historical record, and some of their great works and things that we should be able to go out and see today here in the United States of America, and we can't because it was built by Tartarians, who I believe are the 10 lost tribes of Israel, and the destruction of all of their architecture here in North America. Undeniably a Masonic endeavor in which they made millions and millions of dollars, and prominent names that are still out there today were associated with this. John Quincy Adams, Charles Schwab, I believe this is Les Schwab from the tires, and some of the people who were involved with destroying all of the Tartarian architecture are actually some of the most rich and prominent businesses that are still around today. Now, circling back to the beginning with Christopher Columbus, it's easy to see why Christopher Columbus would have thought that America was Azareth. As we see here, Azareth. Columbus identified America with this land. And when he got off of the boat and he found Tartarians and Tartarian architecture, he probably immediately assumed that he had found the land of Azareth, where the lost 10 tribes were at. But going forward to today, where we have access to some of these maps, and we can see that Azareth was in fact on the other side of the Bering Strait, and all of the 10 tribes had to do, or one of the 10 tribes, or a couple of the 10 tribes, was cross over the Bering Strait into America, and they started building their society there. And in closing, I want to say that Tartarian lives matter, because when it comes to Hitler and the anti-Semitic and all this stuff, it's really only talking about the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. These are the group that Hitler went after. Hitler wasn't trying to get the tribes of, the lost 10 tribes, because they were gone and they were not living in Israel at that point. And Hitler was out to get the Jews, the Jews of Israel. So while everyone gets all in a bunch over the Jews, which would be considered the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, let's not forget that the other 10 tribes are also important, and they seem to be, anyways, Tartarians. And I don't think there's anything more racist, even worse than what Hitler is done, as to have destroyed all of the architecture, take them out of the history book, tell everybody that they aren't even a civilization of people anymore. It's just like a section of land that we used to call Tartary, and to the point where they're not even talked about in history books anymore. And all of their cities that they had built in the United States and elsewhere throughout the world, all of the star forts that we see everywhere, has just been destroyed and taken out of history book like they don't even exist. And that's a greater atrocity than what was done to the other Jews, that they probably are the lost 10 tribes of Israel, and that's why they've been removed from history books. One interesting thing here is that these cities, which were inherited by the early American Masonic settlers, is that it doesn't seem like there was any war that ever went on. And I always wondered, where were the Tartarian people? Because it seems like they just walked into these cities and took them over, and there was no altercation or anything, almost like the cities had already been abandoned by the Tartarian people. So after Columbus had run into the Tartarians, did they abandon their cities? And that's when I thought maybe they were raptured, because if they were the lost 10 tribes of Israel, or God's people, those are God's original people, maybe God actually raptured them and they just disappeared. And that would mean we need an Antichrist. And I don't know of a better match for the Antichrist than Master Mason George Washington himself. I mean, nobody would have ever suspected him as a Mason. Everybody loves him. And a quick look at the characteristics of the Antichrist. He claims to be God and is worshipped. Well, that is Washington, and that is pretty much looks like God to me. This is the apotheosis of Washington, which is on the ceiling of the U.S. Capitol building. And really, you look up here to the heavens, and you see the clouds of heaven, and right square in the middle is, there's nothing else to say other than that's God. And that's George Washington. What about this? This is enthroned Washington, a large marble sculpture. And what does that look like? This is a god. In fact, it's based on the great statue, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the statue of a god. And it's interesting to notice that you've got one hand going up and one hand going down, much like you would see with Baphomet, or this, one hand going up and one hand going down. So I don't think it's far-fetched to say that he's worshipped as a god, because Washington definitely is. He will blaspheme God. That's what Freemasonry does. He will display miraculous powers, even causing fire to come down from heaven. And there's not a one-to-one match for that for George Washington, but shortly thereafter, rockets' red glare and bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. And if you research that, during the time of George Washington's army was just the time that rocket explosives were starting to be used, and we even have our Star-Spangled Banner singing about that. So that's a pretty close match, if you ask me, to fire coming down from the heaven, rockets' red glare, and all this coming down in the air. The Antichrist comes back to life. I'm not sure there's really a good match for that with George Washington. But ruling in full authority, there's no better match than George Washington. Not only was he the President of the United States, he was also a Mason, and you're not going to have more power than being a Master Mason and being President of the United States, controlling the world's economy. Whose picture is on the #1 USD in the world? That's right, George Washington's. Antichrist desecrates God's temple. What does Freemasonry do? The Masonic temple certainly desecrates God's temple. The Antichrist attempted destruction of Israel. Destruction of Israel? You mean the 10 lost tribes of Israel? And the destruction of all the Tartarian architecture that used to be in North America? And now it's completely gone? Funded by the Freemasons? This destruction of... Is this destruction that it's talking about? The destruction of Israel, or the 10 lost tribes of Israel's architecture, causes Earth's armies to fight against Christ? I'm pretty sure that's what Freemasonry is doing, and that's definitely what Antifa and all those guys want to do. Final Destiny in the Lake of Fire. I'm going to leave number 10 up to your interpretation, but George Washington matches about 8 out of 10 of the characteristics of the Antichrist. So I started to wonder if the Empire of Tartary was actually raptured, and we're living in a post-rapture time in which the book of Revelation hasn't fully covered, or there's been little prophecy over the times that we're currently living in. So there's a lot of questions put forth in this video, and if there's any comments or questions you have that can help understand this lost history, since we don't have a lot of books or things or architecture or things of this nature, because it's all been destroyed. So Anything or clues that you may have, please put them in the comments below so we can collectively get back a little bit of this lost history. Thank you for watching.